You're listening to the Fort Erie Podcast, your local source for upcoming events, hot new listings, and bite-sized interviews with business and community leaders. Here's your host, Brent Jones.
Good morning, hello, and welcome. You are listening to Season 5, Episode 6 of the Fort Erie Podcast. It is Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, and I'm your host, Brent Jones. And today not only marks the finale, the end of Season 5 of the Fort Erie Podcast, but also the series finale, the final episode for now. And I'm going to take a few moments at the end of today's episode, rather than reviewing upcoming community events, to reflect a little bit on the past 3 years of producing this show. But today, my guest will be Stephen Passero, who was my very first guest. Season 1, Episode 1 will be my final series guest today as well. Stephen will be joining me to discuss his new role with Fort Erie Festivals. But first, let's take a look at what's making news in Fort Erie. So, as many of you know, yesterday, March the 21st, was the first day of no more mandatory masks. And I know some of you, most of you are happy about that. Some of you are not. But this also was announced. I'm not sure if you heard this, but there's also been an elimination of the need for negative COVID-19 tests to enter Canada for those who are fully vaccinated. Sandy Pierce, who founded the Families Are Essential Facebook group, was thrilled when it was announced on Thursday, as documented here in Niagara this week. So on March 17th, it was announced that as of April 1st, fully vaccinated travelers coming into Canada and Canadians returning home will no longer need to produce a negative COVID-19 test upon arrival. The test will strictly be required for those who are unvaccinated or partially vaccinated. So no more mask mandates, and very shortly, no more test requirement to return to Canada. The other story I wanted to touch on, the stage is set for a return of the arts in Fort Erie. So most of us, when we think of public health restrictions, think of the challenges faced by retailers and restaurants. But of course, many of our local purveyors of the arts, such as Garrison Little Theatre and the Sanctuary Center for the Arts in Ridgeway, had to scrap their events. Kind of neat coming up here. A red plaid shirt will be going on May 5th through 7th at Garrison Little Theatre, something to kind of perk people up after a very difficult 2 years. You can get more information about this story and everything we talk about today in the show notes below today's episode. For this week's hot new listing, I wanted to highlight a property listed by my team here at Remax Niagara Realty, and I'm talking about 129 Lavinia Street. Of course, a central location. This bungalow is a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom property, approximately 900 square feet with a full basement, asking $499,900, and sellers will be looking at offers this Friday. If you'd like more information or to book a private viewing, call or text me directly, 905-626-8826. That's 905-626-8826. So let's check in and see what's on your minds here, Fort Erie. Looking at the Fort Erie Questions and Answers Facebook group, Amanda says, I'm looking for exercise classes in Fort Erie or nearby that are early in the morning, like 6 or 7 a.m. early. The top response for early fitness classes was Academics Academy here in Fort Erie. Again, you can check out the links in the show notes below today's episode for more info. The other thing I noticed in the Questions and Answers Facebook group, Bianna asks, can you please suggest a massage place with direct billing in Fort Erie? The top response in the comments that I saw was Bridgepoint Chiropractic Clinic on Jarvis Street. And now on to this week's chat with Stephen Passero. All right, folks, welcome back. I am joined now by Stephen Passero, who many of you may remember was my very, very first guest on the Fort Erie Podcast from Season 1, Episode 1. He's back here for Season 5. Thanks so much for joining me, Stephen. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brent. Thanks for having me back.
Well, I'm excited to have you back. And we talked about a whole number of things the last time you were on the show, but as I understand it, you'd like to talk a bit about your involvement with Fort Erie Festivals. Is that right?
Yeah, it's something new over the last 2 to 3 years that I've become involved in. A great group of individuals that get together to put on events for the entire community. And we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish, even during these uncertain times that everyone has been facing the last couple of years.
It's wild when you think that you and I sat down
talked face to face with no masks on, by the way, just a couple of years ago. And, here we are now, we're talking on Zoom. A lot has happened. And I'd be very curious to know more right now about kind of what Fort Erie Festivals has going on, what's in the works, because as you mentioned, there's been a lot of challenges over the last couple of years. So maybe you can tell listeners more about kind of what Fort Erie Festivals has in the works right now.
Yeah, we're ever changing based on circumstances, of course, but our goal is to provide events that are family friendly and family oriented, that are open to everybody and free of charge. And our very first event was Santa and fireworks. And that came out of the fact that there was no Santa Claus parade the first year of COVID. My friend Barb Horning and I had been longtime organizers of that event. And just due to circumstances and COVID protocol, we were not able to do it. So we thought we still need to find some way to bring Santa Claus to Fort Erie. And we worked with the great group of Fort Erie Festivals to make that event happen. We had close to 800 cars in attendance. We figure over 3,000 people. Santa, some other entertainers, and capped it off with an amazing fireworks show. And we managed to navigate all the protocols in front of us. Wasn't easy, but we never shy away from a challenge, and we were off and running from there.
Well, so as I understand it, the Friendship Festival, even pre-COVID, was kind of that was going away. That was being replaced with something else. And now, is that still kind of the idea is that if possible this year, there's going to be a kind of a Friendship Festival replacement type event? Could we see that happen in 2022 or no?
So the first year that I joined my board, and some others did as well, we made the decision to end the Friendship Festival. It had a tremendous run of success for over 3 decades, which is phenomenal when you figure that the average life expectancy for a festival or fair is 3, 5, 7 years, maybe 10. But you start to get beyond 10 years, and it really is quite something that something survives that length of time. So we felt the time was right to end that for a number of reasons and start with other events, not to the same size, scope, and scale, but maybe do multiple events on a smaller scale throughout the year. And one event we had been looking at planning, we had called September Fest. And we were looking to do it in Sugar Bowl Park, Oaks Park, close down Central Avenue. We had a list of 104 amazing ideas. And of course, that's when COVID changed everybody's plans and altered the way that we live our lives. We thought maybe the following year we could put our plan back into action. Of course, that didn't happen. So we are once again tepidly planning for this September and events. As it looks now, it's maybe a 50-50 shot we can carry that off. But at some point, we will be looking to do a large event. I wouldn't say it's a replacement for the Friendship Festival. Nothing will ever replace what the Friendship Festival was. We are very willing to accept sponsorships. We have a lot of sponsorship opportunities for corporate citizens in the community. Not so much for private individual donations, but definitely corporate sponsorships in many of the events we look to do as part of September Fest.
Well, I'm excited to see what Fort Erie Festivals does, and over the next couple of years, and what's possible there. But you're, as always, a man who wears many different hats, and I understand that you're heavily involved with the Lions Club as well. Did you want to speak a bit about that?
Yeah, I would. I'd love to. We've got a great group of men and women over there in the Fort Erie Lions Club, and we're just one of many terrific service organizations that Fort Erie is very fortunate to have. A lot of people who give a lot of their own time, sweats, and tears to come together and do things for the community, not just in the form of events, but in the funding of different initiatives and funds raised for different programs throughout Fort Erie. And our current project is a legacy project. We have been working for the last 2.5 years on building another affordable apartment building on our Douglas Heights site down on High Street. And we're right now in the application for funding stage with the Mortgage and Housing Corporation. and very excited that hopefully in the next year and a half to 2 years, we can bring another 62 units of affordable housing into Fort Erie.
That's a great answer. And just to end things on sort of a lighthearted note, I'm of course going to put links to Lions Club and Fort Erie Festivals and everything in the show notes here below the episode. But just to end things sort of on a highlight here, when is the next trivia night going to be, Stephen? Since you are famous all over town for hosting trivia nights, what do we have to look forward to here, COVID notwithstanding?
I'm looking forward to our next trivia night where we can actually gather in person. I have done quite a few Zoom trivia nights, which do serve a purpose. They do raise funds for the different organizations that I volunteer to do these trivia nights for. But I'll tell you, there's just nothing that replaces the sound of people in a room together, especially when I go through and give the correct answers and you hear the arguing amongst the table mates and the blaming because somebody didn't listen to somebody else when they swore they knew the answer. So I'm happy to say that the Ridgeway Lioness have asked me to host a trivia night a few weeks from now, and we'll see where COVID protocols take us. But I'm very much looking forward to getting back in the trivia game. It's always a highlight of my calendar when I can do that for various groups in the community and raise a little bit of money and have fun at the same time.
That's great, man. That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate you spending some time with me.
Great. My pleasure, Brent. Thank you for the opportunity. Good to chat with you after all this time.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So to conclude today's episode, I'd like to do just a sort of a quick review of kind of where this all started and where we are now. So I did a quick tally just now, and math is not always my strong suit, but it looks to me like, including today's episode, I've now produced and published 51 episodes of the Fort Erie Podcast at approximately 15 minutes each. I always endeavored to keep them short. I am a bit long-winded by nature, but I've always tried to keep these episodes bite-size for people to listen to. That basically translates to 12 or 13 hours of content I've produced over the past 2.5 to 3 years. If you were to go back and listen to them all in a row, it would be approximately 13 hours. I've had 46 unique guests. So 46 different people on the Fort Erie Podcast, from politicians to local business owners to community advocates. My only real prerequisite was that I had to be somebody who ideally lived and worked, but at least lived or worked within greater Fort Erie, including Ridgeway, Crystal Beach, or Stevensville, and somebody who I felt was contributing positively to our community. Those were my requirements to be a guest on this show. There were a whole bunch of other unique segments. You may recall a couple of seasons having a segment called This Month in Fort Erie History, which was a lot of fun to do. We've looked at Fort Erie job leads, Fort Erie questions and answers, reviewed hot new listings every single episode, as well as local news headlines. There's been some other short segments with sort of co-hosts or side guests, I guess you could call them. James Kulik has offered a couple of different Fort Erie rants unique to the Fort Erie Podcast. My colleagues Ray Rosatani and Cheryl O'Hearn have offered real estate tips of the week, which has been nice. We've done a whole number of giveaways, giving away gift certificates, and I'm going to forget some of these, but I remember for sure giving away gift certificates through the Fort Erie Podcast to the Village Boutique in Ridgeway, the Barrel Restaurant, Lucky Strikes for bowling. I've done a number of giveaways where I've given away Fort Erie Podcast t-shirts as well. And if you go right back to season 1, episode 0, the trailer, the preview before the show ever became a thing, I explained that I wanted to do something different in our community that I hadn't seen before. That there were podcasts were like the new thing. You know, people embraced video for years, and now somehow we've returned back to audio as the place to be. And I hope through producing this show, I recognize, you know, that at no time was I using professional equipment. Did I enter a studio where we had like top-notch audio quality? I haven't shied away from airing episodes or conversations where there have been audio issues, because this was never supposed to be perfect, but it was supposed to be unique to our community. And I hope that you have enjoyed listening to this program as much as I have in sort of creating it and producing it. And you know what? I may return to producing the Fort Erie Podcast someday. I've really enjoyed doing it. But the reality is that every episode, even though you might listen to it and it's only 14 or 15 minutes, by the time I've finished conducting the interview, putting together all of the notes on, for each episode, editing the audio, finding the information like local news headlines and that type of thing, it takes several hours every week to put together one episode of the Fort Erie podcast, even though the final product is only 15 minutes. And with my firstborn, my daughter, expecting to make her debut next month, which my wife and I are very excited about, by the way, it's become one of those things where I go, all right, I have to make some concessions in my schedule. And for the time being, this is going to be one of them. So you can go back and listen to any previous episodes of the podcast you want at any time you want. You can access all previous episodes at theforteriepodcast.com, or you can look it up on all the usual podcast players you may be familiar with: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even YouTube, SoundCloud. It's everywhere. So if you wish to get in touch, as always, whether it's related to this podcast, real estate, or otherwise, visit theforteriepodcast.com and click the contact button at the top of the page. I'd be happy to connect with you, dear listener. But so long for now, Fort Erie. Take care, and thank you so much for listening over the past 5 seasons.